right? Like, so it's going to make everybody agree to the recording. Okay, cool. Welcome everyone to the Bliss Commercial Division training. This one is going to be on multifamily, first of 5 trainings that we'll do over the next 5 months. We'll also be doing industrial, retail, office, and then finishing up with land. So we'll be looking at each of the 5 sectors. And the purpose of these trainings is not to provide a comprehensive you know, A to Z, but it's to give you enough information to be able to talk to potential clients in these different sectors and communicate with them and be able to talk knowledgeably. So multifamily. So we're going to talk about multifamily purchases. So multifamily kind of is between residential and commercial. Obviously, with multifamily, we're talking about you know, people where people live. Generally speaking, up to 4 units is considered a residential, and over 5 units is considered commercial. So it's a little bit of a hybrid between residential and commercial real estate. We're going to talk about how to value multifamily properties. And then we're going to talk about what to look for in multifamily properties, and then talk a little bit about the due diligence. You know, once we have once we write a contract and due diligence, some of the unique things to multifamily. So first thing is talking about property valuation. There's the kind of short way to take a look at a property and give it a rough valuation is to use what's called a gross rent multiplier. And the gross rent multiplier, you basically take the annual rental revenue and you multiply it by a multiplier. Now, traditionally, that multiplier is somewhere between 8 and 13 times. So if, for example, you have a property that generates $50,000 in rental revenue and you use a multiplier of 12, that property would be roughly worth about $600,000. So now we'll talk about in Phoenix right now with where the cap rates are, that multiplier is probably even higher than 13 at this point in time. And one of the biggest reasons that we're seeing that is because people are valuing the properties on what they think the income will be in the future. And so, and there's a huge demand, not just from local investors, but also from people all across the country investing in Phoenix commercial properties. So that's kind of a rough multiplier. We do want to do, you know, with the multifamily properties, we do want to do a broker price opinion and do a full evaluation. And we do want to base it both on income and comparable sales. The income, we want to try to use actual income if possible. If we're doing a listing for someone with a multifamily, we want to use actual income as much as the seller is willing to provide. Or if we're trying to value a property that we're purchasing, we want to try to use actual income. But a lot of times we have to use pro forma income. One of the ways to get the pro forma income is that we need to get average rents for the area. So we've got to dial down to the area where it's at and use the average rents for the area. And we can get that data from either CoStar or from the MLS. As far as valuing in terms of income, the cap rates now are actually below 5%. Actually in Phoenix, cap rates are 4.1%. So using a valuation, depending on the area of town and depending on the property, you know, we can use a cap rate of 4.5 or 5% would be best for valuing it in terms of an income property. And again, I can help you guys through this if you get a listing on there. Delinquency rate is the rate, is one of the factors that we have to take a look at. That's the rate that people are not paying on time. Typical averages are between 5 and 7%. Another metric that we have to keep in mind is what's called the concession rate. So the concession rate in multifamily is the difference between the asking rent and the actual rent that the property owner is able to achieve. Typically, those run about 0.5%. Depending on the market, can run anywhere from 2 to 8 weeks of free rent. Usually the concession rate is in terms of free rent up front. You know, they offer a month free rent. Now you're seeing very little free rent being offered. You know, obviously in times when there's a lot of vacancy, you'll see people getting 3 months rent and stuff like that. So now it's down to basically nothing. Because the vacancy rent rate right now in Phoenix is around 5%, which is, you know, at a 10-year low. So we do comp sales, like when establishing a value. The only difference with multifamily than other commercial or residential is instead of basing it on per square foot, comp sales in multifamily is based on per unit. So when you're comparing, so you again, just like any other, when you're pulling comps and you're trying to establish comp sales, just like you would for residential or for other commercial, you're trying to find like properties and as much as possible. And then when you compare them, you're doing it on a per unit basis, instead of a square footage basis. But you do want to try to find comp properties that have similar 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom type scenarios. So any questions on that? Nope.
No questions thus far.
Yeah, actually, I do have one quick question about in a cap rate versus the multiplier. You mentioned, you know, 8 to 13 as the rent multiplier versus the cap rate, which is between 4 and 5. So which one is that essentially the same thing, or is that?
No, that's a great question. Sorry, I should have explained that a little better. The gross rent multiplier is based on the rent revenue. So that is based on the rents that the property owner collects.
Okay.
The cap rate is based on the income that the property produces. So that is the income, the rents less the expenses.
Right.
So, and that's a really good question. So sorry, I didn't explain that a little bit better. So the cap rate is based on income, and the gross rent multiplier is based on just the top line number, basically the revenue part of it. So, and the cap rates, that's a better valuation. The gross rent multiplier is just kind of like when you're looking at properties, you can see what it is. It's kind of a quick calculation. So if you're doing a full valuation, you want to take a look at the cap rate. And you need to be very careful when you're looking at properties, because a lot of brokers will represent pro forma numbers. And so, those aren't real. We can do those, and that's the best, but we want to try we need to verify those as much as possible. So on those numbers. So that's a good question. And operating expenses. So the rule of thumb on operating expenses has always been 50%. And so, that's kind of been the rule of thumb on the operating expenses, is that if you're getting $50,000 in revenue a year, your expenses is going to probably be around 25. Now, and I'll send this out in a PDF, but in Phoenix, the last 5 years, it's been closer to where the operating expenses have only been about 38%. And the income has been more around 62%. So the return has actually been better than what the historical rule of thumb. So I actually think in Phoenix, 40% would be a better number to look at for expenses.
And with the upper, with those expenses, does management fees get included in there
Yep,
as well? Okay,
yep. And I'll show you a breakdown of the averages. I'll email those out of the breakdown of the averages of what those expenses are.
okay.
So I'll kind of send a detailed on that. So. All right, cool. So let's move on to property searches. Okay, so now, if we've got a listing, that's a little bit of information on the listing, and obviously we can help you a little bit more. So switching hats, and we're a buyer's agent now, and we're representing a buyer in terms of purchasing a multifamily property. And I have one that I'm working with right now. So you need to, obviously establish what's the buyer's goals. And there's a number of different strategies that they can look to do. So you can look for a value add if the buyer is looking for a value add type situation, or are they just an investor and they're looking for a return? And that's going to make a big difference on what type of property that you're looking for. Value add situations are obviously great. Somewhere where you can take a look for a property that they're able to come in and rehab and improve. And then of course, in the long run, increase the rental revenue and increase the rents and increase the value of the property, because the value of the property is ultimately based on the income from the property. So those are situations that you can take a look for. If you're looking for investment, you can look for just a strict investment, someone who's already done the value add. You'll see a lot of those on the market. You're obviously with those, you're going to see a very low cap rate, very low return. So, but that would be for if you had a client that was not wanting to be that hands-on and they were literally just looking at it as an investment and a return. They're probably going to hire a management company to manage it. And they're just looking for that. So, and then the other strategy is kind of an investment with an upside. So maybe you've got some, and I'll talk a little bit about this. Is it maybe you've got some expiring leases and that are coming up, and they're able to they're able to raise the rents back to where the market is. Or maybe they can do some just cosmetic improvements to the property and get a higher rental revenue, and where there's not a huge investment of time on behalf of the client. So you just got to take a look at what your client's goals are, with any client, and you can basically look at those three different strategies. The thing is, look for less than 100% occupied or soon to be expiring leases. If it's less than 100% occupied and you're able to go get it leased, you're going to lease that at market rates, and market rates always go up, and for the most part, and they're certainly going up now. So take a look at that. Some more advanced strategies, more complex things is land assemblage. And that's basically where you've got a couple parcels next to each other that your client's able to acquire and improve the property. The other thing is what's called land banking. And land banking is buying a property that may have a higher and better use at a different point in time. Maybe it's an old apartment building right now, but maybe it can be an office tower or something else that, with a higher value at a later point in time. So these are some other strategies to take a look at, where the client can acquire the property, have some income for a while, and then have some long-term property appreciation, because it becomes a more valuable property as things go through. Say the light rail is going through there or something, something along those lines, where that's changing, or they're building a large, like downtown Mesa, where they're adding like the school. They've got 2 big schools going in there and everything. So that's called land banking. So All right, so we're looking for properties. So there's things you can do before and after contract acceptance with a multifamily. Before contract acceptance, you can ask for a rent roll, and the rent roll should have detailed information, rent information in terms of when, and also when the leases expire. You need to know, exactly how much everybody's paying, and when the leases expire. You can ask to see unoccupied units. You will not be able to see, no one's going to let you see a tenant occupied space without a signed contract. But if there's any unoccupied spaces, you can take a look at the unoccupied spaces, and those will give you a sense of the condition of the property. So, and how well it's been taken care of. You need to find out if the units are individually metered versus master metered. For electric, it's preferable that they're individually metered, and then you're not having to go through the work of allocating the electric bill to the different tenants. Most of the time, you're going to find them individually metered. It's preferable that the landlord pays the water, sewer, and trash to make sure those things don't get turned off. So, because obviously it's a mess if those things get turned off. So it's preferable that the units are individually metered for electricity and gas.
And is mastered meter just mean the whole building is monitored
Yeah.
on a system, like the last building we showed?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep. The other thing to take a look at it, is popular now. I think we're seeing a little bit is conversion from hotels and motels into multifamily properties. And so, it's slowing down a little bit because the travel industry's rebounded, but definitely there's still some opportunities for that to take a look at it. In terms of searches, there's a lot of stuff on the MLS. There are things on CoStar that you won't see on MLS, so it's important to look on CoStar. Not as much as other commercial sectors, because a lot of stuff is on MLS. There's a lot of property being built now, but most of what's being built now because of construction and land costs are higher end apartments. So we've got a little bit of an imbalance thing going on in Phoenix right now, where we're addressing most of the supply that's coming on is high end, but the demand is for affordable. So if you can find affordable, and again, that's tough, but if you can find affordable, you're going to have your client is going to have more demand for the product than trying to compete with a lot of the higher end apartments that's being built. In terms of price point, once you get over 2 or 3 million in terms of a price point, your client's going to be starting to compete against institutional investors. And that's going to be a little more difficult because those investors are going to need, or they don't need as high a return as a private investor. So and while that may be a little intimidating, I did see something on CoStar that over 50% of the sales the last 5 years have still been made by private investors as opposed to institutional investors. So even though there's tons of institutional investors in the market, there's still a huge opportunity for private buyers, and that's mostly what you're going to find in terms of clients. Vacancies are higher in supply heavy areas like Phoenix, Tempe, and Scottsdale. If you can, there's definitely a demand in the West Valley and the East Valley for apartments, but there's less supply. So those are valuable, but there's obviously more demand in Tempe and Phoenix for apartments. So
I have a question for you, Sean. Have you seen any demand for this kind of stuff in the West Side, like Glendale area, specifically around the stadium itself, because I know I see a ton of new developments, especially apartment buildings, luxury apartment buildings popping up left and right, and there's more land space available. Could you see people being enticed to move that way as well, or just kind of keeping it more towards the east side of the valley?
I think there's demand all across the valley. In fact, I think the demand's even higher in the West Valley, because you've got a lot of huge employers opening up over there. You've got there's a lot of jobs being created on the West side. There's more jobs there's so much industrial development and so many of the warehouses and stuff like that. So there's huge demand. And the West side is really, really booming.
Because Amazon just bought some land over there.
Yeah.
As well too. And they're going to need, a plethora of houses or housing to fit their new employees, along with a couple other tech companies and such that are looking to move out west because East Valley is just so expensive and so congested. And I think the space for warehouses and apartment units right now will be somewhat more affordable living that way compared to Chandler, Gilbert, or Scottsdale as in affordability, but there's a lot of space and land. So I was just seeing what you saw.
Yeah, and the Southwest Valley is really exploding, and there's a lot of cool developments out there. Buckeye and Goodyear, and the 202 going around now and hooking up with the 10 is great for the West Valley. There's talk of another freeway being built to relieve the I-10 pressure south of the I-10 that'll run in the Southwest Valley. So because that area is just really booming out there. So yeah, I think that the long term, that's a great area to look.
Yeah, I guess in terms of that new highway, I think it's the new Interstate 11, which is supposed to connect, at the end of the day, connect from Mexico all the way to Canada. But I think it will run towards Wickenburg and then connect up to towards Vegas.
Yeah,
along I-93, along the old 93 right now.
Oh, cool. Yeah, that'll be really good. So, and the I-10 needs some relief. Anybody who's driven on I-10, no, it knows.
I-10 is awful, hands down, one of the worst freeways I've ever driven on. I hate going on I-10.
It's starting to get there with the 5. It's the 10 and the 5 are right there together now.
I think my wife and I both have to get our windshields replaced because that's the only place where rock chips. I hate every time I drive. I'm like, you know what? This is it. So there'll be another one, another windshield, another $300 repair. So anytime I can avoid I-10, I tried my best for sure.
Hey, Sean, I have a question. So when valuing a property, if the rent roll shows that it is month to month versus long-term contracts, is there a difference in the valuation of the property because of that particular structure?
Yeah, I would still base it on actual income. So, but your client may want to, if you're representing a buyer, the buyer may, well, there are two things. If you're representing the buyer and you have the buyer's agent hat on, then your buyer may look at the value of the property of, yeah, I can raise those rents, especially in this market with the low vacancy and the certainty that they would be able to raise those rents. So you could do you can do two valuations. You can do a valuation based on actual income and current income, and then you can do a pro forma valuation. And what I'm seeing a lot of right now is most of what's out there on the market now is priced based on pro forma, just because everybody in the marketplace, both buyers and sellers, know that you're able to increase the revenue, and so you're seeing most everything right now in this market based on pro forma, just because of the trend of the market. So the prices are very high, the cap rates are very low. When you get down to the cap rates below 5 like they are now, that makes it tough to make sense financially on a if you're borrowing the money and everything. So, because you're not borrowing it. If you're having to borrow the money, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute, but if you're having to borrow the money, and you're only getting a return of 4.5%, that's not a lot of income. So it's tough to make the numbers work. So you really have to have some vision as a buyer of what it can be. So a couple other things on property searches. There is competition coming for multifamily in terms of there's more communities that are being built as SFR, single family residence, build to rent. So that'll provide some competition, but those are still going to be trending toward they'll be competing more with the higher end apartments. It's still tough with the land costs and the construction costs to make those, truly affordable housing. So, but you're going to see a lot more of those. One interesting fact too is that the cost of living index is now for Arizona now for the first time is over the national average. But rents are still below national average. So if you kind of take a look at that fact going forward, you can see that there's going to be rent growth. If the cost of living is above, national average and rents are still below, I think we're going to continue to see rents increase. So a few things on, that's a little bit on doing property searches and looking for property. I want to talk a little bit about the contracts and then the due diligence and some of the unique factors that have to do with multifamily. First of all, going back to, we talked about that residential is up to 4 units. So if you have a property that's 4 units or less, you are required to do all the residential disclosures with the property. So you have to make sure you do that. So now the positive thing is that if you have a property that if you're working with a property that's 4 units or less, your buyer or the buyer can qualify for residential financing. And there are programs available through the FHA and VA that they can with lower down payments. And once you get to 5 units or more, it's considered a commercial transaction. And you're looking at more of a 30% loan to value. So your buyer's gonna need at least 30% because they're gonna look at it as commercial. So, and I don't know, one thing I don't know, and I can find out, is I don't know how the SBA whether SBA is possible. I don't think it is, but for buying multifamily, I think you're looking at the higher investments if you're doing 5 units. You can use the residential purchase contract if it's 4, but we would prefer you use the commercial purchase contract for any multifamily. It's just it's better for that. So the residential purchase contract is more for if you're going to occupy the property. A few things on due diligence. We need to look for deferred maintenance. Obviously, prior to contract acceptance, we want to, try to do a drive-by. You can't do too much of an inspection prior to, unlike other properties, but we definitely want to drive by, take a look at the roof, the windows, what we can see from the exterior in terms of the maintenance. Even the landscaping will give you an idea of how the property has been cared for. Once we're under contract, we want to have an inspector come out who's familiar with multifamily, and do a general inspection of the property. We want to look, if it's an older property, we need to look for lead-based paint and asbestos in the property. And then you need to have a dedicated HVAC person come out and take a look at the HVAC units. So we want to look for deferred maintenance issues. We want to ask for any service contracts that the seller has. We want to ask for service records, detailed service records on the property. You know, the buyer needs to know what the property looks like in terms of the physical condition of the property. We also now that we're under contract, we need detailed financial information. We need copies of all the leases. We need rental payment history. Obviously, that's very important. We need financial statements. We certainly want to ask for financial statements. Sometimes that's a negotiated point during the contract process, but we certainly want to ask for financial statements, and certainly at the minimum expense, copies of expenses. If there is a management agreement, we want to ask for the property management agreement and a copy of the property management agreement and see if we can take a look at that as well. We want to get estoppels from the tenants. An estoppel is basically a statement of what the conditions are. A lot of times, sometimes there are no leases. Sometimes it's verbal. And even if there is a lease, sometimes it's expired. We want to make sure that there hasn't been any verbal promises made from the seller to the buyer in terms of the rent reductions or anything. And basically what an estoppel is it's basically a statement that's signed by the tenant saying that the conditions of the lease are as such. And just so that we have the tenant is agreeing to what the landlord or the seller has provided as are the conditions of the lease, because we need to know, all the terms of the lease, the rent, who pays for what, when it's expiring, deposits, all that information. We need to research into code violations with the property, check with the city. See if there's any code violations. We need to verify with the city the zoning, if there's any compliance, any liens from the city. Some of that the title company will do, but we also need to verify, make a call to the city and contact them.
Hey, Sean, quick question. With the estoppel, is it correct that you would have to have that document signed by each tenant that is occupying this multifamily unit?
Yeah, we want to ask for it and everything. So now it depends on the leases and everything. So sometimes they may not be able to provide that and everything. So, but it's definitely something we want to ask it. Some leases require that the tenants, sign that, and so it just depends on the lease. If the lease doesn't require that they sign it, then there's nothing really you can do about that. So, but we want to try to get that information as much as possible. We definitely want to ask for estoppels. So,
okay. So
you
now,
don't want to get in a situation where we buy a property and then the tenant says, "Oh no, I have a 3-year lease here." And you're like, "Oh no," so that's not good.
but if there's a signed lease in place, does that suffice as, or does it qualify as an estoppel?
It doesn't qualify as an estoppel. Now, the one thing that you can do is if the seller, it goes back to disclosure. If the seller misrepresents what the lease terms are, then you would have recourse against the seller.
Okay.
But recourse is never fun and never easy, and usually the only people that win in those scenarios are attorneys. And so estoppels go a long way, if possible. So in other commercial, like, it's non-negotiable. If you're representing the buyer, getting an estoppel is non-negotiable. So I mean, it's got to get done. With this being residential tenants, that you may or may not be able to get them. So, but you definitely want to ask for them.
Okay.
And then the last thing on the is if you're financing, you may need an appraisal on the property. You may want an appraisal anyway on the property. Your client might want an appraisal. We certainly want to. I always, even if they're paying cash, I do on commercial properties. Recommend appraisal surveys phase ones, just so that we're covered. That the client's covered, and then also the brokerage is covered too. So, but I don't know that on a 4 units or less that any of those things are going to be necessary. It just depends on the property a little bit, and we can advise you on that. So, because those are expensive, each one of those would run your client $2,000 to $3,000 for each one of those. So, your financing, those may be required, or may not be required. All right, any questions?
Yes, so with the commercial property, like multifamily, inspection period, is that the same 10 days as you have on the residential?
No, typically we use well, it's negotiated. It's a negotiated point like anything. So, and just like residential, we can use a shorter one. But typically we will ask for a longer inspection period. In commercial, we typically go with 30 days. But it is also in a competitive market like this. It's a way to beat other buyers.
Yeah.
So it's a negotiated point. It's a line on the commercial contract, just like it is on the residential contract. The default is 30 days. But certainly, we can do, 10's pretty tough, but I guess you could do it in 15. We definitely, I know one of the ones we represented a seller on recently, we got it down to 20. We asked them for 20, just because we didn't, representing the seller, I didn't want it off the market that long. And so, it's just a negotiated point between the buyer and the seller. If you're representing the seller, you don't want that long of, you want it off the market that long, because you probably, especially right now, you probably have backup offers, or at least at the minimum other interest. And so you don't want it off the market that long, but the default is 30. You will see, I don't know too much, multifamily, 30 is probably the most. Other commercial, you'll see longer due diligence. You may even see 45 days. And financing on some commercial, not on multifamily, but on some commercial, you'll see up to 60 days on financing, just because, especially with SBA, it's a very long process. So how are we doing time? So I will send out, I'm going to send out some PDFs, just so some additional information. I'm not going to, take your time and read them off here, but I'll send off a PDF of all this information that we covered. And then I've got some, like we talked about earlier, I've got some detailed on what the operating expenses kind of break down on average. Again, these are just Phoenix market averages. And then, also in terms of the average revenue per unit, and all the numbers that I send you are per unit, not per property. So again, in multifamily, we're always apples to apples. We're comparing units as opposed to properties or square footage. Cool. Any other questions? All right, good. Well, thanks guys. Thanks for coming. And I will see you guys again in a couple of weeks for our monthly meeting.
Yeah,
Okay,
thank
wonderful.
you.
Are you guys still there?
Yeah.
Mhm.
So Grand Canyon Title, we pay for their farming tool. Shannon said that they have a prospecting tool. She's going to get me more information that specifically goes after commercial farming.
Cool.
And then Fletcher on the morning update. There's a law that was just passed, and it's in regards to judgments against the Homestead Act. So people that are the new law, they can actually file liens now against the properties up to 250,000. And so the title companies now have to, there's a new form coming through that's requiring the homeowner's ID. and people with common names may show up with judgments. The problem is this is going to delay all the escrows.
Hmm.
So it's going to be a form that we require through the brokerage now. So view Coffee Talk when I upload it. And I did ask, this has nothing to do with commercial. It's separate from residential. So if someone owns commercial properties, there shouldn't be a homestead judgment against them.
Right.
Doesn't mean that there's other liens processed